According to Jalopnik, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration is rolling out a suite of artificial intelligence tools to tackle two of the most persistent headaches in aviation: safety risks on the ground and congestion in the skies. For Palantir investors and anyone watching the aviation tech space, this is a meaningful development, not just because of the immediate contract, but because of what it signals about how regulators intend to use AI going forward. According to Jalopnik News, the centerpiece relevant to public markets is a model called Foundry, built by Palantir, a defense and data analytics contractor that has increasingly positioned itself as a critical AI infrastructure provider for government agencies. The FAA plans to use Foundry to pull together data currently scattered across multiple federal databases and external sources, and then surface patterns in safety incidents and operational bottlenecks that human analysts either miss or cannot identify quickly. Jalopnik mentions that FAA data today lives in distinct, siloed systems. Think of incident reports, radar logs, aircraft movement data, runway incursion records, maintenance logs, weather feeds, and perhaps external data such as airport construction schedules or municipal emergency response logs. Each dataset on its own can be analyzed, and the FAA has done that for years. The limitation is in synthesizing all of this information at scale and in real time, or near real time, to spot recurring risk factors and congestion drivers. For investors, the key point is that this is exactly the class of problem Palantir was designed to address: highly fragmented, sensitive, mission-critical data where integration and pattern detection at scale can materially change operational decisions. According to Jalopnik, the FAA expects the first year of development for this AI-driven safety analysis to cost around $4 million. On an absolute basis, that is not a large contract relative to Palantir's overall revenue. However, market participants should not focus solely on the contract size. What matters is that the FAA is formally embedding Palantir's tooling, under an AI modernization narrative, into the core of the National Airspace System's safety analysis process. In government IT and defense, beachheads can expand substantially over time once the technology proves itself and becomes mission-critical. Let's unpack why this matters and how it can ripple through Palantir's business and the broader aviation ecosystem. First, from an investment and competitive positioning angle, this move reinforces Palantir's role as a trusted provider to high-stakes, regulated environments. The FAA is a cautious, risk-averse regulator. When it adopts a tool for safety analytics, that implies the vendor has convinced the agency on issues like data security, model governance, auditability, and human oversight. That is a compelling credential for Palantir when pitching other regulators, both domestic and international. Second, it strengthens Palantir's narrative around AI as infrastructure, not just as a flashy model. The article points out that the main through line among these tools is their ability to synthesize data that the FAA currently holds in distinct databases. That is core Palantir value: data integration, ontology building, permissioning, and then AI-assisted analysis across that unified environment. For equity analysts, this supports the thesis that Foundry is not just a dashboard layer but a backbone for AI-enabled decision-making. Third, it gives Palantir another reference deployment in transportation and critical infrastructure. We have already seen Palantir in defense, intelligence, public health, and some commercial industrial applications. Aviation, especially at the regulator level, is a powerful proof point. If the FAA can demonstrate measurable reductions in runway incursions, ground collisions, and delay minutes attributable to AI-supported insights, there is a clear path to upsell and cross-sell other aviation authorities, major airports, airline operations centers, and related transportation agencies. According to Jalopnik, Foundry's role is to identify repeatable behaviors or hotspots that increase statistical risk, not to predict individual incidents in some science fiction, Minority Report fashion. This is an important nuance, both for policymakers and for investors evaluating regulatory risk. The system is not making autonomous, high-stakes decisions. Instead, it is flagging patterns such as specific intersections where vehicles repeatedly stray, procedures that correlate with near misses, shift patterns that correlate with errors, or combinations of weather, traffic load, and runway configuration that produce disproportionate risk. From a risk management perspective, that framing reduces the likelihood of political backlash around automated decision-making, while still letting Palantir demonstrate concrete safety improvements. That in turn can smooth the way for sustained or expanded funding streams. It is also worth noting that the article emphasizes human review. AI-generated conclusions and pattern identifications will be evaluated by human analysts and decision-makers at the FAA before they translate into new rules, guidance, capital investments, or operational changes. For investors, this underscores a couple of themes. First, stickiness. When human analysts at FAA adopt Foundry as their daily environment, they build processes, habits, and organizational knowledge on top of the platform. Over time, this makes it difficult to switch vendors, and it justifies additional module purchases and larger data footprints. Second, regulatory comfort. Legislators and oversight bodies tend to be more comfortable funding systems that keep a human in the loop. That narrative supports Palantir's ability to win approvals for longer-term, multi-year modernization programs. Now, let's consider broader implications for aviation and how they might feed back into Palantir's perception in the market. Ground safety at airports has become a heightened concern following several high-profile incidents and near misses. The article references a collision between an Air Canada Express flight and a fire truck in March, and explicitly notes that this is not the type of event Foundry could have forecast at the individual level. However, where Foundry could help is in identifying, over time, that certain classes of emergency vehicle movements, under particular conditions, at defined airports or junctions, seem to produce a higher rate of conflicts or close calls. By surfacing those regularities, the FAA can refine procedures, signage, training, and even physical layouts. If the data shows that a particular taxiway and service road intersection generates more confusion, the FAA and airport authorities might modify markings, deploy additional sensors, or change routing protocols. Each such improvement, in aggregate, can drive measurable reductions in incidents. For investors, the key is that Foundry becomes associated with tangible, headline-friendly outcomes, fewer runway incursions and fewer ground collisions. On congestion, the same architecture can be used to understand the complex interplay of flight schedules, airspace constraints, weather, crew availability, and airport capacity. Although the article focuses mainly on safety, the FAA's overall push is also about cutting delays and making better use of existing infrastructure. If Palantir's tools participate in these congestion analytics, they might help the FAA identify where new air traffic management procedures, sequence optimizations, or data sharing rules could unlock capacity without massive capital spending. For Palantir's valuation case, that is important because it ties Foundry and adjacent AI tools to economic productivity outcomes, not just compliance or risk mitigation. Saving airlines time and fuel, and improving traveler experience, are outcomes that can be quantified and used to justify larger technology investments from both public and private stakeholders. According to Jalopnik, the announcement comes roughly 2 months after the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, modified his budget request to Congress to emphasize AI. That timing matters. Investors should note that this is not a one-off experimentation phase. It is part of a broader policy-level decision to embed AI into the Transportation Department's modernization agenda. When a cabinet-level official prioritizes AI in budget requests, it means future funding lines are likely to reference AI explicitly, sometimes even earmarking funds for data platforms, model development, and analytics. For Palantir, which has invested heavily in lobbying and relationship building across federal agencies, this alignment between political priorities and product strengths can be a powerful growth engine. The FAA contract highlighted in the article may be small today, but it might sit atop a much larger potential budget pool for AI across transportation. That can feed not only direct revenue growth but also help the market ascribe a higher strategic premium to Palantir's government segment. Investors should also consider competitive dynamics. The article notes that there are several different AI models from several different companies involved in the FAA's modernization push. While it does not name all of them, this implies a multi-vendor architecture. Palantir is therefore not monopolizing the FAA's AI stack. Instead, it is occupying a crucial integration and analysis role. In many complex environments, that position can be more defensible than a narrow-point solution. If Palantir's Foundry instance at FAA becomes the layer through which multiple models and data feeds are orchestrated, Palantir can become the default data fabric and decision environment, even if other vendors provide specialized models for, say, trajectory prediction or weather impact simulation. The investment thesis here is that Palantir aims to be the coordination layer, which tends to command higher switching costs and recurring revenue. At the same time, investors should watch for signs of standardization and open architectures. If the FAA insists on highly modular, open interfaces, it might lower barriers for future competitors. The balance between Palantir's proprietary stack and open integration will shape long-term margin and retention dynamics. The article does not speak to these details, but they are useful questions for anyone following the stock. Another dimension highlighted implicitly by the article is trust and public perception. AI in aviation raises understandable concerns, especially around safety. The piece goes out of its way to clearly separate what Foundry does from science fiction, future crime prediction. It stresses that no AI system can replace real-time judgment from air traffic controllers and vehicle operators. The AI is a tool to identify patterns in historical and real-time data, not a replacement for human operators. For Palantir, this framing is beneficial. The company has sometimes faced criticism for opaque government work and perceived overreach in surveillance contexts. In contrast, positioning Foundry in aviation as a statistical risk reduction tool, under human oversight, that helps prevent collisions and delays, can improve the company's brand among regulators and the broader public. Over time, that can reduce political risk and make it easier to expand into other sensitive domains. From a financial modeling perspective, how should investors think about this news? In revenue terms, the figure cited, around $4 million for the first year of development, is modest, but it serves as a proof of concept and as a wedge. The more important drivers are the potential for multi-year expansions, cross-agency replication, and the signaling effect for other governments. Analysts might incorporate this by slightly increasing confidence in Palantir's federal growth trajectory and by broadening the plausible range of transportation and infrastructure contracts in the pipeline. For example, success at the FAA could translate into opportunities with the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, or metropolitan transportation authorities, each applying similar AI and data integration principles to congestion, maintenance, and safety. The key risk factors to keep in mind revolve around execution and measurable outcomes. If, after some period, oversight bodies judge that the tools did not significantly reduce incidents or delays, or that they were too costly for the benefits delivered, that could slow expansion and fuel criticism that AI hype drove suboptimal spending decisions. Conversely, if the FAA can credibly report improved safety metrics and operational efficiencies tied to Foundry-supported analyses, it will validate Palantir's value proposition. Investors should also be attentive to how Palantir communicates about this deployment. Overstating the AI's autonomy or predictive precision could backfire if any incident occurs. The article's emphasis on statistical hotspots and human review is a more prudent framing, one that Palantir would be wise to maintain. Another angle is data rights and intellectual property. When Palantir integrates FAA data and helps derive new insights, questions can arise about who owns derivative models, workflows, and configurations. Palantir's commercial success often depends on reusing learnings, templates, and tools developed for one client, in a generalized way, elsewhere. The more Palantir can do that while respecting federal data constraints, the more leverage it can get from each deployment. Investors should view contracts like this as sources not only of direct revenue but also of institutional knowledge that can be repackaged, abstractly, for other clients in aviation and logistics. Now, let's zoom back out to the macro picture. AI adoption in critical infrastructure is no longer theoretical. The FAA's move, as described by Jalopnik, is part of a pattern where large public sector entities, from defense departments to healthcare systems to transportation regulators, are embedding AI into core workflows. Palantir, with its deep government roots, is well positioned in this trend, but it faces competition from hyperscale cloud providers, specialized analytics firms, and domestic alternatives in other countries. This FAA contract therefore serves as a microcosm of the broader AI infrastructure race. The winner is likely to be the firm that can consistently demonstrate secure data integration, transparent and governable AI outputs, and tangible operational improvements in mission-critical settings. Every high-profile deployment that meets those criteria pushes Palantir closer to that position, and the market will price that trajectory into the stock over time. To wrap up the investor-focused analysis, this news reinforces Palantir's strategic posture as a key government AI infrastructure provider. It validates the company's ability to win sensitive contracts in heavily regulated transportation sectors. It offers a potential path to scaled deployments in aviation and beyond, and it underscores the importance of human-supervised, pattern-oriented AI, as opposed to fully autonomous decision engines, in safety-critical applications. At the same time, the contract is not transformational on its own in terms of near-term revenue. The real upside depends on successful execution, expansion into adjacent use cases, and the demonstration of clear, measurable improvements in aviation safety and congestion. According to Jalopnik, the United States is not just experimenting at the edges with AI in aviation, it is increasingly putting AI tools closer to the center of how it evaluates and manages risk in the national airspace system. For stock market participants watching Palantir, this development is one more data point that the company's long-term, government-centric AI strategy is moving from slide decks into operational reality. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you found this discussion helpful and want to stay updated on how AI is reshaping major industries and the companies behind it, consider subscribing and joining us next time.